You're going to use that one.
I'm just going to, yeah.
I'll be
Maybe you keep one permanently, and then
Oh,
we'll
yeah. Share it. Okay.
Yeah, and then we'll share one, and they'll share one.
Now we got organised. Look what happens when the world can
Hello,
together
hello.
and organise things.
Mic check.
This is the most work I've done all day. Joking.
Okay. Amber, shall I get cracking? Just give me the nod. Yeah, everybody rest assured that you can Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming to the Extreme Hangout here at COP27. Big thanks especially to Amber and Al, who are the founders of Extreme. We're here to talk about what we call outsider in nature. The idea for this panel is to really look at, particularly at fashion, but how fashion intersects with other sectors, with innovation and science and technology, and how fashion can take its cues from those sectors. I'm Mary Fellows. I'm the Fashion Impact Director for the Extreme Hangout here. I'm also the CEO and founder of Greenwood Studio, a fashion consulting platform. When I got to Egypt a couple of days ago, I was ushered through the queue, and the immigration official said to me, "Okay, what do I put on your visa form? What sections shall I put?" And I said, "A fashion." And he looked at me and he went, "What? Sorry, what? You work in fashion? What are you doing here? You sure you're here for COP27? And then we started, both of us, having a really good laugh. And I said, "Okay, sir, tell me, what's your T-shirt made from, or your shirt, or your trousers? Is it cotton or polyester?" And he was like, "I think this is cotton, I think this is polyester." I said, "Okay, right, so the cotton that made your T-shirt quite likely could have had fertilisers that could have gone into the soil, that could have caused disfigurement to the faces of the children who were around them. They could have ruined the surrounding habitat. The polyester, guess what? That probably came from fossil fuels. So I'd quite like to be let into the country." He started laughing, and then we really made friends, and he let me in. But it goes to show you that a lot of people don't realise how bad fashion is for the planet. And it's the reason we're thinking about circularity in Mother Nature here is that if fashion copied the way that Mother Nature has designed her systems so beautifully for millions of years, then we wouldn't have the problem we have with fashion being such a big polluter. If you think about when a bird sits on the branch of a tree and goes to the loo, that what happens becomes fertiliser into the soil. The leaves from that same branch become soil, and on it goes into a perfect circle. Just like the sea out there, the water will evaporate, become clouds, become rain, and go back into the rivers and the lakes. So Mother Nature invented what we call closed-loop manufacturing. And so the answers to sorting out the problem we have with fashion and other wider design and manufacturing all come from this perfect circle. We've got here today a brilliant panel who are going to combine science, innovation, and fashion to help us talk about this problem. And we're going to be moderated by the brilliant David Shuckman, who has been the science editor at the BBC, a journalist for 4 decades. This is his 11th COP. He's visited the Arctic, I think, 15 times. So you're in extremely good hands. And with that, I will let him introduce himself and then the rest of the panel. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Mary. Great introduction. And thank you. And you talking about cotton reminds me of one of the assignments I had that first really taught me about how effectively we're trashing the planet. In Uzbekistan, there's the Aral Sea. You might have read about the Aral Sea, seen videos, seen pictures, drying out. And the reason it dried out, leaving a toxic dust bowl full of pesticides and fertilizers and very, very high incidence of cancer amongst the people living around this apocalyptic scene, is the cotton industry. In the old days of the Soviet Union, and then after the breakup of the Soviet Union, huge cotton farms upstream just took all the water that would otherwise flow into the river, down the rivers and into the lake. And what was the world's 4th largest inland sea is now this dust bowl. If you ever wanted to shoot apocalypse, if you needed a scene for a video of old fishing boats that can no longer operate. They're stranded on this toxic sand. Huge fishing factories that are now abandoned. People looking thirsty, dusty, blighted, and it's because of the demand for cotton. And at the time, for me, it was just like, whoa, this is like being hit in the face, slapped in the face. Because I'd come into reporting on the environment slightly cynical, like I think a lot of journalists. You know, we're a cussed bunch. We don't like being told what to say or what to do. And I'd grown up with environmental campaigns. I had a little badge saying save the whale, save the forest. But when people said to me, oh, is it that bad? I wasn't convinced that it was. So going around on my assignments to the Aral Sea and the Arctic and so forth was like being repeated, having Mother Nature slap me repeatedly in the face. This is serious. We're trashing the planet. And for no obvious gain other than just extremely short-term profit. The other one, just to share with you, is the Amazon. I've been to the same bit of the Amazon rainforest 4 times over 20 years. And I have seen what should be dark, noisy, dense, biodiverse forest with monkeys screaming and birds crying morph into sterile, huge, silent fields of monoculture growing soya for the global food industry. And again, made me think, well, the Amazon rainforest is one of the few allies we have in the fight against climate change because it stores so much carbon. And here we are hacking it down. And so we come to COP27. Progress at these COPs is absolutely incremental at best. They are not going to save the planet. They're important, but they're not going to provide the answer. What will provide the answer is the fact that COPs provide a kind of oasis. Do you know, it feels a bit like an oasis under this wonderful set of carpets and so forth. A kind of clearinghouse of ideas. And I think if it serves the purpose of gathering brilliant, innovative minds, then I think we do have a chance. And that's why I'm so excited to be with this panel, bringing together sustainability, environment, climate, science, solutions. So look, I'm going to ask each of you just to briefly introduce yourselves. I could try, but I'd probably get it wrong. We'll just work down the line. Just say a little bit about yourself and your kind of motivation for being here, and then we'll get into a discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Great intro. So I'm Dr. Amanda Parks. I'm currently the Chief Innovation Officer of a company called Pangaea. We're a material science company, but we manifest in the world as a fashion brand. My background is in science. I come from kind of all different forms of engineering. First was a mechanical engineer, and then have a PhD from the MIT Media Lab that's hybrid between material science and computer science. So I'm looking a lot at the interactions between the digital and physical worlds. And the point of me coming into both fashion and sustainability is really about how we use digital infrastructure, everything that's come from the information age, to affect biological organisms and materials. So material growth, which involves a lot of biology, so biofabrication, et cetera. Pangaea is manifests as a fashion brand, but we are R&D at our core. We have an entire scientific research department, institute, labs across various parts of the world, and we have a material philosophy which I've called high-tech naturalism, which is looking at taking places where there's abundance in nature, so things like agricultural waste, so we don't have to do exactly what you're talking about, moving towards biodiversity in fibers and not everything in cotton. And also thinking about other areas where, carbon is now something that we have in abundance, so let's use it. That's how we get rid of it. We put it into things responsibly. So that's kind of the premise of what we do as a company, and I'll pass it on.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Nicholas.
Hi, I'm Nicholas Kirkwood. I am a luxury women's shoe designer based in London. I started the brand back in 2005 with the aim to sort of create sort of innovative silhouettes and really sort of experimenting with, at the time, what seemed very sort of exciting kind of new materials. My sort of focus really for the last sort of 4 years, I'd say, was has really sort of been looking at innovation, particularly in the materials themselves, and that sort of started. It's such a sort of a wormhole of where to sort of start. But I looked at things that were recycled, looked at things that were natural, looked at things that were biodegradable, and these were the things that were sort of there at the time, and I sort of started trying to sort of make pieces with them all together, and then sort of realizing that I'm just really essentially making this sort of Frankenstein kind of item where it's like it's a recycled heel with a biodegradable upper and so-called bio-based leather, and I'm sort of looking at these things and thinking, like, let me actually just sort of scratch the surface a little bit more, and I find that recycled heel is actually in fact only 30% recycled, and it's still classified as recycled, and then the rest of it is virgin plastic. That the so-called bio-based leather is exactly that. It's bio-based, and it's covered in polyurethane, and actually including that, it's also then backed in polyester. Essentially just making a sandwich, and it's really a and then I thought, hang on, I just need to really look like further down this kind of wormhole. I kind of like need to, I was kind of like sort of shocked by these sort of these kind of revelations, and I sort of looked kind of further and further, and I sort of realized that how can I really try to find a solution when I'm trying to make such a kind of complex item with so many different kind of components. How do I try to unify that into some kind of way that there's a sort of strategy for a kind of a post-consumer existence of that? What really happens to it, kind of this post sort of life? How can I actually try to make something that is ultimately circular instead of quite clearly linear? I then, sort of really been looking, particularly, I think, the pandemic has made a huge sort of difference to, having a time to think and really to reassess, your business models, what is it that I really want to achieve with the message that I want with my brand. And so I ultimately then sort of decided to really to look at the whole kind of structure of how I could kind of create a new sort of business, and ultimately realize that my current sort of situation, I was still really kind of part of the problem, and I really wanted to be kind of part of the solution. And
let's hold the next thought, and
yeah.
we'll come back to you.
Okay.
That's a really interesting introduction, and it sort of set us up for the first topic. But let's carry on with the introductions.
Yeah.
Nicholas,
Go on.
I was vibing on that.
No, I mean it was fantastic.
Greetings, y'all. Kempton White, founder of the Emissions Capture Company. Fundamentally, infrastructure background, heavy infrastructure, large scale, whereby I was focused on the nexus of energy, water, food, and waste within a sustainable context. From there, developed a platform whereby we capture waste streams in gas, liquid, or solid forms. We run it through modularized equipment that ultimately produce sustainable commodities. One of our installations captures the carbon and wastewater of Nestle in Pretoria, South Africa. It was the first carbon capture unit delivered in South Africa, or Africa period. And not only are we reducing scope 1 emissions from the direct stack capture, we're also offsetting 22 times the actual carbon intensity of animal feed on the back end by making sustainable baking soda, for example. And what we found more recently, it's quite interesting, is the multinationals aren't just focused on scope 1 reduction, but also the scope 3, where it's the real challenge, which comes to supply chain, which is fundamentally mostly what we're talking about today.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks. Nikita.
Hi, I'm Nikita. I'm from the Mills Fabrica. We are the official innovation partner for the Extreme Hangout. It's a pleasure to be here. And so the Mills Fabrica, we are an incubator and investment fund based out of London. We invest in 2 pillars, and it's really on a B2B side behind the curtain from the fashion industry. So we invest in textile, we call it, which is textiles, fashion, apparel, and the manufacturing supply chains. And then we also invest in agri-tech, so the food side, because there's a lot of similarities when you're talking about organic crops for cotton and organic produce for food. We have 27 brands within our portfolio who we incubate and invest in, and we have an innovation gallery in London where we showcase all of the innovations alongside brands which are making conscious decisions. So yeah, that's in King's Cross as well.
Hey, thank you very much for these great introductions, and you've all got fantastic stories to tell. And I mean, in the same way that I shared my story of the profound shock of seeing what happened to the Aral Sea, what was the turning point? Did you have one turning point? Is there a moment, a sight, a conversation, an insight? I mean, Nicholas, you described you were effectively peering through the layers of greenwash on what was meant to be green and sustainable, and I love your description of the wormhole, that things were not as they seemed. Was that something? And then you mentioned COVID. Talk us through just what tipped you into where you're going now.
I think it ultimately is really an education, and just like a realization through being presented with sort of facts, whether being presented or finding them out yourself, is and then actually having a bit of a conscience and a kind of will to try to find a solution, is ultimately which kind of led me to try to really to look at potential other avenues within this. And shoes is a really particularly complicated item. There are so many different kind of components, all made from all completely different types of materials, and and before, I know sort of like banging on before, but essentially it was what I was really wanting to sort of say is that I really sort of through kind of COVID, I sort of realized that this kind of incremental change that I'm trying to sort of put in, even though as fast as I was sort of trying to do it, I ultimately ended up sort of just like putting on the table, okay, these are the things I can use, as opposed to doing it the other way around. It's a bit like, let's use the best option that is available, and if it's not available, we'll wait until it comes around. I then decided, okay, we'll put just on the table what we can use, and it's really so little amount of, literally we could put them on that table. And so I started for a couple of
things that were genuinely sustainable.
Things that were 100% natural.
Okay.
So basically my kind of revelation was, okay, how do I make a product that is 100% natural, not a single sort of thread that is kind of or glue that is kind of coming from any kind of fossil derived product.
Okay.
And I then ultimately said, do you know what, this is part of the problem, but it's not the only part of the problem. The problem is also fixing the materials is maybe 50% of the impact. How about how it's made, where it's made, how it's shipped, how it's warehoused, what happens to it post-consumer? These are all items that add really to the other 50%. So I basically kind of through kind of COVID came to thinking of how to come up with a new concept, and ultimately decided that I cannot do it with my current brand, and I'm going to actually from February next year close it to focus completely on a completely new concept, which will which I hope will be it's definitely going to be a world first, and it's going to be quite a radical approach to how a shoe is made and how it comes to life.
We'll see if we can tease out of you a few more details later.
Nikita,
while you've got the mic, was there a moment of revelation?
I think it's just always been connected to nature as a kid, and just seeing the destruction of the oceans was probably the biggest revelation. Going for a swim and having plastic wash up onto the beaches. So previously to joining the Mills Fabrica, I was at an organization called Parley for the Oceans, which had the biggest ocean cleanup network on the planet. And seeing that firsthand, and seeing the pollution, and seeing the destruction of fossil fuel derived products in the ecosystem is something that I thought was very important to try and challenge. And even at Parley for the Oceans, we were looking at, we were recycling ocean plastic, but we really we started an investment fund where it was about investing in alternative materials. And so joining the Mills Fabrica was very natural, because they invest in alternative materials to try and replace all the toxic materials that are in the industry today.
So rather to focus on reducing the source of the problem, effectively, rather than clearing it up.
Yeah, reducing the source. I think if we can solve what's going on at a manufacturing supply chain level, then everyone else, doesn't really have to make those conscious decisions, because it's already been made for you. So I think trying to solve that problem, which can make systematic change throughout the industry, when we're talking about fashion, let's say, from luxury all the way down to value. I think it's important.
Amanda.
Yeah, I
Was
think
there one moment?
well, it's something that actually isn't fashion related, where came from e-waste.
Okay.
So I spent a lot of time in my first 3 years at MIT soldering circuits, building modular constructive assemblies for robotics, and the whole nature of just watching how much e-waste we were creating at MIT, just in our one kind of small lab complex, and thinking about how almost nobody there, even though we know how to build this stuff, no one really knows what things are made of and how to take them apart. And there's this massive kind of information lacking. And I started teaching a class, because there wasn't anything offered, called Futurecraft, Radical Transparency in Product Design, where we just spent, and this was in like 2006, before it was cool to do this, like took apart products, tried to figure out what they were made of.
It's cool to be pre-cool, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then just kind of, working through, okay, well, it's even harder to be able to build circuits from recyclable things, but understanding that we can, in material science, have triggers, different kinds of natural triggers that we can put into materials about biodegradability. So I came to fashion through the back door, kind of through wearable tech, and thinking about, well, first we need to change the nature of just standard textiles because they're so abundant. So after I finish, totally transforming fashion, then I'm going on to circuits, and because I do want to get back to building more wearable tech and interactive technologies, but I just need to solve, because I said I'm not retiring until I built a fully biodegradable circuit. So,
okay. I mean, there's obviously great applause for your ambition, and we're with you all of the way. Thank you for that. Kempton, what sort of got you into this, thinking this way? I mean, clearly capturing the carbon coming out of big industries is a huge challenge. Some might question whether it can ever be done at 100%. When we were talking earlier, you reckoned you could do it that way. But what drove you into this?
It was actually less to do with carbon, but more to do with brine from desalination. I was attending the commissioning of a nat gas-fired desalination plant to supply water to an alumina refinery. So you can imagine of all the different types of pollution and molecules coming out of this facility. And I was asked to look at how to make this thing more sustainable. And I said, where do you start? Do you start with the nat gas? Do you start with the membranes? Do you start with the brine that's coming out at 15% salinity being dumped into the Arabian Gulf? And the real trigger...
Hang on a minute. They strip out the salt.
Yeah, so you're taking
the seawater and dump it into the ocean.
I got to be careful what I say as part of that commissioning. But what really scared me was, you've always heard about the canary in the coal mine, right? The way you commission a desalination plant, when you're taking that 15% salinity and dumping it back into the ocean at 90 degrees Celsius, they actually would dump live shrimp at the point of exhaust to see how quickly they would cook, to then determine how much they should manage the salinity and the temperature. And when I saw that, I was in such shock that I realized that we need to start focusing on these basic molecules or compounds coming out of waste streams and just look at the periodic table and say, okay, what can I do with brine? What can I do with CO2? And that's really where it started, was waste to value with... Yeah, that's where it started.
You were offended and shocked by the sound of it, by that site.
I mean, I started looking more into salt pollution that nobody talks about. I've been invested in carbon utilization for a decade, but I will tell you now that, no one talks about the Great Barrier Reef bleaching, yet there is one of the largest desalination plants in the world in Perth. And when you dump 15% salinity at 90 degrees Celsius into a fish tank, it might have more of an effect on the oceans than a bit of CO2. So that's where I started.
That's a very profound insight. So I wonder whether we could talk a little bit about before we get to solutions, what the obstacles are. I mean, what's holding things back? Because all of you obviously have had experience where you've presumably tried to convince people of the right way to go, talk to, investors and backers and colleagues and others. And it sounds like it might have been a bit of an uphill struggle at times. Amanda, what's your sense of why, particularly with fashion, we've known about the problem for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an infrastructure problem in general. Specifically, for what we work on, and the reason, the angle that we've taken is there's been a real kind of communication disconnect between science and fashion. And I think, they're in some ways they're kind of oil and water in terms of thinking about science takes a long time to develop. It's it's hard. It's and fashion is trying to kind of turn over new stuff every few months.
Seasons.
Yeah, exactly. And also then just the ways the companies work. And so we were trying to build a bridge between how do we get these new startup innovations and also research from labs that we're doing more quickly into the supply chain. And it involves, I think of my job a lot as scientific diplomacy, where it is convincing people. It's like all these very small things, get at the right factory to be able to try out a new fiber and also take on some of the risk for them, because I think what we have is a risk-averse culture, and the factories shouldn't all be put on the factories because they're working at a very slim margins, but the giant global brands could be taking on a lot more risk and could really be switching up their business models. I think that's one of the biggest problems is where does the profit go? We're showing that you can pull the profit back from your product, put it directly into R&D. And other companies are saying that that's not possible. So switching that up. So also where the investment money goes. I mean, I always say follow the money. And we, the founding team for Pangaea came together because we were all working on an investment fund together. And I joined that team because I was watching all of the wrong things get funded. Like from Silicon Valley perspective, I came out of there and it was all these kind of, apps that could have a 1-year ROI, et cetera. And so nothing, changing the culture of investment to be about world-changing, kind of global-changing innovation that is going to take longer than a year or two to see change and also to see profit. So I think I kind of think about it in that infrastructure, that the global economy, I love donut economics. I think we're probably in the world of people who understand what that means and how we can have responsible growth. So that's, yeah.
Nikita, what for you is, if you like, what is the chief cause of the fashion industry being so destructive at the moment, is it?
I think that
is it consumers that we all just pick up?
I think the chief cause is firstly a lot of the materials are fossil derived, like polyester, nylon, and then it's like the mixed synthetics as well. But then also I think it's down to the brands to make conscious products, and it shouldn't be the choice of the consumer. The consumer shouldn't have a choice of having a bad product or a good product. It should just be a good product. And I think maybe
the use of the word, when you say good, you mean good in a planetary sense?
Yeah, in a planetary sense, which doesn't affect the environment. And someone was asking me this earlier today. I mean, I think, we should be paying a little bit more and consuming a lot less. So having a better quality product, which is good for the planet, rather than a cheap, let's say, fast fashion, which is disposable and bad for the planet. So I think that's one of the things. Yeah.
But Nicholas, you described how it dawned on you that perhaps you were part of the problem. I mean, you were part of an industry that creates a problem. It attracts headlines. There's a social media frenzy when new products come out. I mean, in many ways, look at the scale of shopping centers around the world. I mean, consumerism is kind of in many ways fueled by fast fashion, isn't it? And how do you kind of get off that?
I mean, it's partly. It's really part of the DNA of fashion. This idea of something constantly sort of moving forwards. I mean, it's why sort of fashion exists. So I think to try to change course in that is ultimately going to really sort of look at how what our expectations are as well, and it has to be a certain amount of education as well, and certainly it's a confusing minefield out there, and there's a lot of misinformation, and particularly in how things are sort of labeled, or how like I was telling you, I thought this sustainable recycled heel, as it were, was so-called was fully recycled. Little did I know it was only 30% recycled, and that somehow counts as being recycled. And I just sort of found this all the way along. I mean, the terminology is, I think, some of the key misleading elements that are happening within fashion. I mean, sustainability as a word, is, it's something in my book is either it's either sustainable or it's not sustainable. It's literally like you're either pregnant, you can't be a little bit pregnant, you can't be a little bit sustainable. It's really one or the other. And so you can say, impact reducing, you can say what are other words, but just don't use that. Along with, my sort of favorite, the favorite few, but something where they say that, made with, when they say made with bio stuff, it means it's not made of. That's quite clearly there. It means it's like Sunny Delight is made with orange juice. It's certainly not oranges, So it's, and I think that it just becomes extremely misleading because, suddenly you can really go down to the lowest sort of common denominator. And I sort of, it's where, you have, what's it like, plant-based something. That's another one. If you're a vegetarian and you're going to a restaurant, you wouldn't expect a ham sandwich to be called plant-based because of the bread, and even if it's got made with margarine, and you can't see the ham because it's like squished between two pieces of cornbread. So how can you label something that when it is as a leather as a leather alternative when it quite clearly is a high percentage of like fossil-based things. So I think the education really needs to be at the kind of core, and it's like how is that disseminated, and whether that's through governments or whether that's through forced labeling, I'm not sure, but it's definitely a real issue.
And do you all think that, I guess I'm going to aim this at Kempton, I mean that science, that technology, that innovations in chemistry, I guess is what we're talking about, and biology can offer solutions that then become more appealing to big industries. I mean, you're working with Nestle on the plant you described in South Africa. I mean, do you think the fact that it's viable, what you're doing, helps convince big industries, I mean, I know you're not directly working in fashion, but big industries nonetheless, that there is a set of alternative pathways?
Yeah, when it comes down to it, you got to make it easy for the procurement director, the supply chain managers. And what we try to do, and what a lot of other of our peer set try to do, is make it so that they can switch suppliers without changing their behavior, but it improves it ultimately on the product from an ingredient perspective for the consumer itself. A lot of what Dr. Amanda and Nikita and Nicholas were saying. If you make it easier for the procurement managers in the supply chain, there are plenty of solutions out there which are basically operational efficiencies. I mean, we're just taking waste and utilizing it. It's resource extraction. Fundamentally, it's a very simple business. It's not mysterious. And if we have other processes which materially take waste, utilize it, you solve part of the problem, not the entire problem. The rest of it obviously needs to be left up to nature and our natural carbon sinks. But when it comes down to it, I would say procurement managers, incentivizing them is the most important.
Because presumably, one of the big obstacles, we've got a cost of living crisis, acute pressure on people's incomes, inflation pretty high, rising in many countries. I mean, it's not the easiest time, maybe, to be saying we need to be paying a premium for something to be more sustainable or fully sustainable. Anyone of you want to pick that up? Amanda, you look like you're poised.
Oh, yeah,
I don't know.
no, I was just going to say, I don't think we need to be so focused on the consumer. I think this is an infrastructure thing. So instead of you saying like something is either sustainable or not sustainable, I think of sustainability as a series of priorities and choices, right? And so there's no one perfect sustainable solution. It depends on where you are, what you have at hand, what the resources, what point in time, what you're trying to accomplish. And so this idea of what you were mentioning is there's a kind of like an innovation kind of level that we have to get through. And if government or infrastructure or investment can help with that, and also we need to be a little bit more patient because the nature of kind of R&D and innovation has to it's going to take a little while to adjust that plant. And somebody has to invest in that, and somebody has to believe that it's going to work better. And if governments and infrastructure are able to get us there, then we'll have that next shift. So I think that I think blaming it on the consumers, I mean, like thinking about the whole idea of carbon credits, that was an invention of the fossil fuel industry to kind of shift the burden onto people to say, oh, you need to reduce your carbon footprint. So I think that that's not a responsible way to think about it in terms of consumers. But just one last point, going back to fashion, I also think that there are different models, which fashion is about this nature of change and beauty and aesthetics and personal expression, and that's why we love it. But there are other ways that brands can make money from, rental, swapping, how can we make fashion more experiential? So it isn't just about making new and having it be about consumption, but having it be about sharing and the experience of the fun artistry part of it. And that's why I also support things like models around rental and all those things, and brands actually digging in to think about those as different revenue streams. It's not just about sales, but what if you followed your whole product for its whole life cycle and you knew where it was and you brought it to people where you wanted it and all of that. So that was a bit of a mixed bag of answers. But
but that'll appeal to some people. It seems, and I think
especially for young people.
Yeah. And I think a few of you have touched on, I think one obstacle, which is language, and what we all understand, and what everybody thinks they understand. And Nicholas, you've talked about, sustainability. It's binary. It's on or off. I mean, everywhere we go, everything's planet friendly. It's, even the most carnivorous fossil fuel companies, you go to their websites, there's a picture of a little girl holding planet Earth, isn't there?
Or BP has a flower. Is that
a flower. I mean, it's in a way outrageous, isn't it? Kind of what they're getting. But help us just with the language. I mean, okay, as scientists, we've got scientists on this panel here. Biodegradable.
Okay, yeah, I knew this was coming.
Compostable.
Yeah.
Recyclable.
Yeah.
I could go on. Let's just do a few of them.
Of
because
course.
I think it might be helpful to everybody.
Sure, and I think that the point is that all of those words do not have a single scientific technical definition, and that's part of also the problem. And if they did, it would be like 2 pages long and it wouldn't be approachable. But I think the point is to say that, if something is both biodegradable and compostability are certain conditions in which an object will be set in, and they mostly involve microbes. It's all about bacteria. Like I just go microbes to people, right? So, because the other question you get is why, if something's biodegradable, why doesn't it biodegrade in your closet? And the answer to that is microbes. So it's putting it in the right environment with the stuff around it. So usually biodegradability occurs, and this is why I say usually, I'm like being very careful, but occurs in anaerobic conditions like in landfill, versus compostability occurs in aerobic conditions, and you have different sets of microbes and also different nutrient sets and temperatures and conditions. So that is sort of a way of explaining that it's actually, because there's no single definition of those things, and there's also even the testing mechanisms that we're using are incredibly arbitrary. I was shocked to find out the levels of standards of what they're measuring, how much is left, and it was just not that scientific. So it's a new area where it's being researched a lot better now, but I also think that it's important to recognize that something could be biodegradable because there's been an additive put into it. So it could start as a fossil fuel and then made to be biodegradable through a chemical additive, which isn't necessarily good. Something could be bio-based, have something added to it, and then end up not being biodegradable. This is what also is super confusing, not just if it's blended, but even if it's 100%. And so we do not have a good labeling language. Am I further complicating the point, or I don't know how to answer the question
of illuminating and complicating, if I may say.
Am I right in thinking that there's also, even say an apple under certain landfills, that have been dug up after 25 years, the apple is still in one piece because maybe it's been compressed too much or whatever. So it's amazing to think, even if you try to take the most natural thing and you think that you could put it into landfill and it will just sort of degrade. Is fashion got a chance to do that?
Yeah, I think what was just one last point is to say, our philosophy is to first say, do no harm. So we think about it as like almost like medical. So if one of our cotton T-shirts just say ends up strewn in the ocean or strewn not in a landfill or not in the right place, it won't actually create microplastics and then further pollute. It'll just sit there and do nothing. And everything is also about
but it
how
might
much.
snag wildlife. It
Well,
might
no,
cause other
sure,
problems.
sure. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that that's a
Yeah.
good thing, but what I'm saying in the sense of if you put a whole bunch of polyester in the ocean, you're literally going to mess up the entire food supply chain and eco supply chain across the whole thing.
Because that
because
degrades.
because of the microplastics. Yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
yeah.
But you
into
have,
microplastics,
right.
yeah.
But if you put a cotton T-shirt somewhere, it's not, it's not going to do harm as it starts to
I mean, I'm sure
degrade.
we've all
So
seen the video of where those
Yeah.
clothing dumps
Yeah,
are on
so
the coast in Ghana, and
it's
huge.
It's also all
Yeah.
about just like how much of everything
Yeah.
is everywhere, right? So that's why we need to get consumption down, but then getting things into the right places. And I like to talk about how if you want to really innovate in fashion, you should go work for the Department of Sanitation, because we need infrastructure on the end of life side.
To
No one
handle
is doing
the end
that
process.
part of it. Yeah.
Nikita, you were reaching for the mic.
Sorry.
on
I
this.
was just touching on the whole thing about what is the problem. I guess it comes down to the labeling, and it's lobbying the governments to bring in restrictions or rules around labeling, because no one knows what they're buying. If it's a biomaterial, it could be bioplastic, which could just be equally as bad for the planet. But people are thinking they're making conscious choices by buying a bioplastic shoe when it's technically not that great. So
So it could be a bioplastic that doesn't degrade easily, or it could be.
Essentially, I think yeah, I mean, because I think the molecular makeup it may come from come from sort of like a bio-based
bio-source.
ethanol, but it's ultimately it's exactly the same product. Is that correct? Yeah.
Okay.
So it still won't break down
Okay.
naturally. So it's better on the front end in some ways, but on the post-consumer, it still has the same issues.
So the word bio, as it were,
Biomaterial,
as an
yeah.
additive to the word plastic or material, doesn't guarantee.
Yeah, so it's big. It can be, big greenwashing, because I mean, there can be
Yes.
bio-based materials which are 100% natural and just completely disappear into the environment and cause no harm. But then there can also be equally bioplastics.
Okay.
But then when they label it for branding for consumers, it's just biomaterial, and then people think they're making a great choice by buying this product.
So look, Mary and I, we were talking about this before, and it's a great thing that you raised, Mary, and I just want to explore it a bit more. Okay, let's come at it from the point of view of the consumer. I know we don't want to angle, but I mean, I'm in a shop, and I want to do the right thing, and there's a choice. What should I look for in a label? Okay, let's say there's a better system in the near future of labeling, enforced labeling. What should I look for? Not the word bio.
I mean, I think Amanda will be probably better placed for this, but I would say, for me personally, I look for cotton. But then you can buy an amazing cotton jersey, organic cotton jersey, but then the dye on it may not be the best and maybe the most toxic dye, So, and people don't think about that. They're like, I've made a conscious choice. I've bought a cotton jersey, organic. Everyone's got a living wage on it, but it's jet black, and it's that's one of the most polluting dyes.
So
apparently.
okay, so cancel the black cotton jersey then, right? What are you
Well,
going to
also
go
the
for?
white one as well, because that's probably been
The
bleached.
white
so-
one, okay. All right, come on. Let's try and find what we can.
I just want to
Okay.
say one
What
thing
the
about
labeling could,
so
what would useful
it can't,
labeling
it
look
can't
like?
all be in the labeling, because then you would have a label the size of the garment. But and I also want to point out one thing, that not all these the reason that brands are using these materials is because better ones don't necessarily exist. And that's part of the problem, right? Or they're not manufacturable. That's why I'm so convinced with getting things out of the lab and trying to get them into companies and into real manufacturing. So I don't think that, when, like you probably said, when you're trying to develop your shoe, the products weren't available for you. The better materials were not available. So that's one of the first things to point out. There are a few brands that are getting up, ramping up, and we now have a full 100% bio-based leather, but you can't do everything with it. There are limitations of color and structure.
This
And
bio-based leather.
is 100% bio-based and biodegradable. And so,
Okay.
so going back to
But you don't know that. You don't know that from that name.
No, you do not. No, it's called this.
The fact
It's
that
called
it's
mirror.
bio-based, it may fail
No,
the Nikita
but-
test.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So on our website, first of all, we have QR codes on everything that you can scan and get full transparency.
Okay.
We have a full scientific section. So if you were shopping in a store, I would scan the QR code and try to find out more. And I know that's not a great answer, but right now that's the only way that we have of fully explaining that here's, we've done a full life cycle assessment, here's the exact components, how much of each. And then also brands being feeling free and comfortable to point out what they're doing wrong. And I think this is a big thing with press and also consumer, like this kind of consumer anger. If there was a sort of understanding that there aren't necessarily better choices available right now. Like for synthetics, it's a huge problem that we don't have like fully anything that's like, we don't have a great option for spandex and elastane that's 100% bio-based, is fully biodegradable, in great condition, all these things, and we're working on it,
and
but
those are
it's
both
taking
fossil fuel derived.
Yeah, absolutely,
yeah.
and we're it's going to take at least 5 more years to get something like that that we're working on out, and a lot of big companies are working on this, like big like the DuPonts and everybody, like we're going after it. But if you think about it, the fossil fuel industry, polyester was developed in the 30s. It didn't make it really into products until the 50s. That's 20 years of lab stuff going on to get it, and we're under a lot of pressure with climate change, so we got to speed it up. But this idea of, I don't believe the brands are specifically trying to greenwash. They're trying to do the best of that, and then being able to point out, here's what is great about our products, here's what we have not solved, and here's what's available and what's not available, and all of that. So,
I mean, just as a little bit of fossil fuel context, I don't want to spoil the mood here, but I mean, the oil industry has clocked that there is this process called the Paris Agreement and all these COPs, and the projections are, which have not been realized yet, the projections are that oil gas use will go down for transport, for example, and for heating. But guess what? They're looking to compensate for that. So they all have huge expansion plans. Louisiana, Antwerp, a number of other places for vastly bigger plastic production plants. So their business models, their projections are for the future is plastic. Now, if you look it up, there's Cancer Alley in Louisiana, an astonishingly polluted stretch of the Mississippi River, with oil refineries, plastic production facilities. They produce the polymers, which are often in the form of nurdles, little rice-sized bits of plastic. They get shipped around the world to places that then process them into the textiles. And of course, a lot of these get leaked out of the containers and pollute the oceans. And these little nurdles have been found on every beach of every continent. I mean, so there's a massive. So I think we need to be thinking in terms of the industry underpinning plastic
terrifying
is definitely not thinking of scaling back, but in fact the opposite. And so I'm counting on you lot to come to the rescue of this. I mean, no pressure.
Just quickly, because I know I've been talking a lot, but I think the idea is really that if there's several material breakthroughs that make utilizing what materials are considered sustainable or 100% bio-based and biodegradable at the same price points and at the same efficiencies as the oil, then they will start to switch over. And this is where we need this surge in scale up and manufacturing of a lot of good new technologies.
So, Nicholas, look, I know you don't want to talk about your new venture, but I mean, you've obviously done the research. You sounds like you're confident you found a way that would pass all the scrutiny of the panel here.
Well, I think I went down as far down that wormhole as I could, and then try to look back up and try to find what could be a viable a viable option. Look, it is certainly not necessarily the most scalable. It's definitely still quite an experimental experimental kind of sort of study, but it's one that I feel, because I'm sort of tackling so many different elements, essentially I want to put the entire process on the table and see, essentially just try to edit out all the things that made it, are complicating the matter, to try and make it literally as simple as possible, so that, because to your point, that if there was the materials are sort of available, they really have to kind of become there at the same sort of price. So how do the big high street fashion brands survive? Because it is clearly impossible to make an organically raised T-shirt for £10. So someone down the line is getting really screwed, and the planet is as well. And they are going to be like the the oil companies. They are going to be fashions. They're investing huge amounts into all sorts of green prizes, all sorts of. I mean, I was even sort of asked, do I want to apply for one? And I was literally sort of shocked, saying, honestly, like, I will regret that for the rest of my life if I suddenly get a prize for, from essentially they want to be so much part of this kind of conversation so they can steer it away from ultimately what will be their fate. And it's so science will have to literally be magic in order to be able to make a T-shirt for £10 in the future. I'm sorry, that sounds kind of quite negative. On the flip side, can I also say that something kind of quite positive, that I really truly believe that there is amazing innovation kind of going on, and there are companies like Pangaea that are at the forefront of innovation, and that is just going to help really inspire the fashion industry. And one thing that is absolutely sort of true about the fashion industry, it may be very sort of slow to kind of get things going, but when they do, the floodgates open. And it will. I have no doubt that within 5 years, that it will be the norm to be able to make far more environmentally conscious products.
I mean, it's definitely become the norm, hasn't it, for things to be branded as in some kind of form green. And I guess it's a question of how you kind of move on from that. Kempton, are you going to ride to the rescue with some clever new material that ticks all the right boxes?
Well, our chairman always says that waste is what you have when you run out of imagination, and so fundamentally,
that's a
yeah. And if you just start
actually
with
plays nicely to Mary's point about bird poo is a fertilizer, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
and following that thesis, if we just pay attention to our waste streams as a starting point, that's what we're trying to do our part. But coming back to your previous question, what was just discussed here, I know it's not in the fashion realm, but a great case study on consumers making a choice and being informed is Q4 results of Unilever last year. They're moving to a position whereby, if you remember 40 years ago, you didn't have nutritional information on your packaging. They're making a move for their 70,000 SKUs to put actually the carbon footprint.
sorry, what's a SKU?
Stock keeping unit,
Okay.
the little barcodes.
Okay.
And so they're actually going to be putting the carbon calories, so to speak, on their packaging. And while the methodology of how you can guarantee that carbon accounting is precise, they are making an effort. But what was interesting is the consumer response, that the sales of those products with the carbon calories went up 69% in that quarter. So there is a willingness of the consumer to do so. But then again, as we're coming back to, is it really bio or whatever else?
I'm very worried about those metrics. Sorry, I have to say.
No. You're absolutely right, and that's why I said you can question the methodologies. But the fact is that if there is, it's an example of labeling into consumer reaction, I guess, more than anything. But when it comes down to breakthroughs in materials, we're just starting with the basics. We're starting with waste, whether that's in gas, liquid, or solid form. We defer to folks like Dr. Amanda to have the breakthrough materials.
I mean, it sounds like the QR code is a way to go, isn't it? Because you can fit a QR code on most products, and then presumably you can have levels of.
Right, and that's the science.
Not everyone wants the science, but they might want
exactly science communication and information. I think it's a big part of what we actually do, even though we're like a material science company, because that's really lacking. But I think also getting young people interested in the sciences and thinking that it's cool, that's a big part. And making the scientific information accessible in the right way. So that's up to brands and marketers and copywriters and all people that are in different worlds as well, kind of getting interested and digging in properly into the science too. So we need help from all those areas.
But that crowd have to be engaging sincerely, because they're very, very skilled at inventing language that is distorting. And the wonderful French diplomat Laurence Toubiana, who was an architect of the Paris Agreement, said that greenwashing is a new form of climate denial. I mean, it's that serious, it's that profound. And there are brilliant people engaged in finding new ways of denial and delay and confusion and so forth. So there's a profound and ongoing challenge all the time, isn't there? Let's just, we're into the kind of final few minutes here, really. I'm going to ask you all just to cast ahead. what would be a kind of dream scenario if we were to meet again in a year or two? What would you like to have achieved? What would you like to see happening? Share with us a little bit of optimism as well,
Sure,
perhaps.
yeah,
I know you've
yeah,
all been
yeah.
you've been working hard at that. Let's just work down
Sure.
the line on that.
Yeah, so we definitely take an approach to be optimistic, because as a scientist you have to be, because you're trying to do these things that seem impossible. So we, in the next year, we'll be releasing what is a fully 100% bio-based, biodegradable alternative to nylon, which is a breakthrough into a real product.
And what's that product going to be?
It's going to be like a windbreaker to start.
Okay.
But it's something that, we have very tangible. And we have the life cycle assessment, the biodegradability testing. It's been going on for multiple years to get there. We also have a new treatment called a multiplex laser surface enhancement, which will mitigate microfibers. You can put in traditional and recycled synthetic textiles, and it actually kind of seals them to not give off microfibers. So this isn't a transitional solution, but new, and this involves a low frequency laser, plasma gas, and a kind of superheated system, but very low energy, no water, no toxins. So it's a breakthrough from that side, and it also does print prep and all the invisible things better. So just two examples of things that are coming. So we're working on that. But what I would really like to see especially from this audience, is infrastructure change, like governments taking part in true infrastructure development, understanding the back end on products, systems like you're doing, that we're all kind of, working together to side stream way. I love also the idea of side streaming, where you can use multiple parts of an organism from the very beginning, so that we all are kind of working, like I'm trying to work on this narrow angle of product, but I want to see infrastructure change.
Okay, great. Nicholas, you will have launched your new brand.
Oh yes, I hope so.
It will be a stunning success.
Well, let's see. I mean, it's quite a.
We'll all be wearing the shoes.
I hope so. Yeah. Basically, no. It's really no. Honestly, it's going to be an exciting sort of year for me, and it's going to be a challenging one at the same time. But I ultimately also sort of believe there's going to be multiple sort of solutions and options for the customer in the future. And I like to sort of almost use the analogy like 20 years ago, you go to the supermarket, you just had milk, and one type of milk, and then maybe 5 years later, you had 3 different types of skim milk, semi-skimmed, and full fat. And now you kind of go, and then there's so many sort of plant-based alternatives, and I think that kind of the option for people to sort of choose, and for companies to really perfect, properly sort of circular solutions. So whether that's really recycled or really natural or whatever it may be, but so the customer can really sort of choose that this is the sort of the life cycle that I want my product to have.
There's transparency, there's honesty,
and multiple sort of solutions, because ultimately also if you pull out of one thing and heavily go into another, that's going to potentially cause another issue.
Brilliant, brilliant.
So it does need to be a multi-pronged approach, I think.
Kempton, give us a dream. 18 months' time.
18 months' time.
I just invented that. It can be whatever time frame you want.
Immediately actionable. We're pleased that Nestle wants to do another 20 plants with us, and looking at some other multinationals. But that's, again, talking about the scope 1 reduction. Where we'd really like to do...
But it means less carbon getting into the air.
Yeah, I mean, we're offsetting the traditional process that's 160 years old, which is you burn hydrocarbons to create baking soda, for example. It sounds ridiculous, but that's how it happens. Expansion and adoption on the scope 1, but what we'd really like to see is the sustainable commodities that we make on the back end, partnering with groups such as yourselves on being an ingredient, and you all tell us how to brand it, and here's a 22x carbon negative product. Take that to the consumer. We've done kind of our part of the chain and integrating those efficiencies. So immediately actionable. We'll have adoption by Nestle and a few other multinationals, but we'd really like to take those products and put them into the supply chain of cosmetics, wellness products, pet food, animal feed, pharmaceuticals, nutraceuticals, but that's kind of where we have to defer to the experts next to me.
You're going to have a busy time.
Yeah.
That's terrific.
But one other thing is that you mentioned new materials. What we're looking at is taking old chemical processes from the Industrial Revolution and figuring out new ways to do it. So, for example, the carbon capture plant is a disruption of the Solvay process, 160 years old. And we just filed a patent and doing a R&D endeavor with Southwest Research Institute in San Antonio that is disrupting the Haber-Bosch process on how you make carbon-free ammonia, which is a transport for hydrogen. But that said, we'll see where we are in 18 months, but at the very least, we'd like to have our end products being adopted directly into the consumer space.
Fantastic, thank you. Nikita.
For me, so my role is really doing a lot of business development on behalf of the 27 innovators that we have within our space and that we support and invested in and incubate. And I just hope that, you know, come 18 months' time, there's more brands like Pangaea who want to take up and give these, let's say, startups a voice and a platform to do, like, first of all, it always starts off with a capsule collection, but working with a known brand always helps them get that first sort of foot in the door, because it also helps them get press, also helps them get funding. And I think, yeah, the future where I want to see is just, yeah, more brands adopting that and really leaning forward and understanding that innovation isn't a journey and it doesn't happen with a flick of a light switch. You know, it takes a while. So that's it.
That's fantastic. Now, look, I think we've got a bit of time for some questions. I will get waved at when we have to wrap up.
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. Does it work?
Thank you.
Just a quick.
Do you want to just say who you are and where you're from?
I'm Ishik. I work with Campton, actually.
Okay.
So we are in the same business. So when you look at the life matrix of the population in the northern hemisphere, and that couple that with longevity, you look at a couple of things that are coming across as very, very significant. Number one, always is health. So this is academia, 20, 30 years of research. Number two is how people want to live. Number three, what they want to consume. So when you look at all these things that you've been saying, I guess the number one factor that makes everything holistic is health. So when you even look at what you consume, whether it's in form of clothing or eating or whatever, if the health factor is not engraved into anything that we do, it's not gonna sustain. So when people think about longevity, people first think about what they eat because it affects their health immediately. But when they think about clothing, what you guys have been discussing here, it doesn't really interact with longevity that much. So how does the academia, like Dr. Amanda, how does the academia actually take that into account and utilize this research, how health is impacted with the types of things that you're talking about?
Interestingly, I was moderating a session this morning where this very issue came up, that the understanding exists in part in the public mind, but not as fully as it should, about the link between textiles and fossil fuel pollution. And you can make a very direct link between childhood asthma. I mean, we had the case of the first confirmed death from air pollution in the UK, blamed on traffic pollution, but I mean, burning fossil fuels, we know, has a health impact, and it's not included in the cost of those fossil fuels, the burden on the health service. See, I think that the messaging and communication around that linkage, I mean, I've found in my own work that people don't understand that plastic comes from oil and gas. And I think, Nicholas, you've been on a bit of a journey with that as well in the way. But was your question aimed at it was more an observation, but it's a really good one. Anyone else want to jump in on that? This question that
use an example.
Yeah, please do.
So, for example, there's lots of things that are labeled vegan that are actually made of plastic, which is one of my pet peeves.
Okay.
But this idea of, when you think about animal products, it's very easy to see this relationship of, toxic, animals being badly treated, the toxic leather industry, et cetera. But then so having a vegan, something synthetic, that's actually down the chain. Like you were saying, it's creating a whole different kind of fossil fuel pollution, microplastics, et cetera, messing with the entire biocycle in potentially even a larger way. So to me, it's really an education question. And I think this idea of even just more up close thinking about how many, we have crossover ingredients, like we use seaweed in both our our clothing, or our kind of blends with cotton, as well as we have some food products that we're bringing out, and to actually create a kind of this story, this integrated story as a brand. Why are you guys releasing food? And we're like, well, it's the same ingredient supply chain. And then you can talk through it that way. Hopefully from a consumer perspective will make more sense.
Yeah, so education and awareness is really the key there, isn't it? We'll take another question here. Yeah, please.
Hi, my name is Matt. I work in South Africa in biomimicry, but more in the aerostructures area. My question is really for Amanda. How do you balance the differing commercial priorities between being a material science company with high R&D budgets and heavy investment, and also being a fashion brand? And how do you relate to investors and other stakeholders, balancing those?
Yeah, it's been a very interesting journey. We basically launched in fall of 2019, so we kind of launched into COVID. But this turned out to be sort of strangely beneficial because we were making sustainable tracksuits, so work from home gear. So we sort of rose. So we were kind of lucky to sell quite a bit and become profitable quite quickly in a way that allowed us to funnel money into research. But basically, we're trying, as big of an experiment of our company that the research of the science is, it's also a business model experiment where we're shifting profit back into the research. So luckily I have just as innovative partners in development and finance that are trying to make this work. So we have a full, we have 15 scientists and 10 people on an impact team inside of a fashion brand, but we're not spending, so there's a lot of money going there, but we're not spending $2 million on celebrity endorsements. Like, we don't pay anybody to wear our stuff. We literally use our science, like shooting in our labs, as the marketing. So there are some sort of business model shift ups that we're trying, and we're also trying to act more like a tech startup. Also, like, our Series A investors are Valor, which are the early stage investors into Tesla and SpaceX. So they see us really as this long-term investment, and that's really important, that we're not being pushed, to actually sort of do like giant retail, like open 20 shops, or like, no way, that's a terrible carbon footprint idea. So we are taking this long road. So the business itself has grown very quickly. So we've been very lucky for that part of it, that we're profitable. But in the same way, anything that's on the investment and everything is going into a long-term research. So it's an experiment.
Good. Thanks for the question. Great answer. Another question here.
Hi, I'm Rona from the UK. And Kempton, please don't punch me for asking this question. But obviously you've now been able to achieve carbon capture at scale. So how do we balance that with business as usual? And what are Nestle doing to inset versus, or is the carbon capture just the bits they can't inset, so it's their offsetting strategy?
Thank you. I can't answer for Nestle, but I can answer for ourselves. And fundamentally, we will not apply our technology to any sort of emission stream that can't be replaced by a solar or wind or battery. We've made that a decision. That said, when you have biomass or biogas or waste energy, you still have CO2 coming out. So what we've been doing in our partnerships is integrating directly into the chimney outside of the boiler house. So regardless of what they're burning, we're capturing the carbon. So we future-proof it for their transition itself. So yes, Nestle does have plans to get off of other hydrocarbons, but there will be CO2 feedstock coming out because, biomass has actually more CO2 per ton than coal in some cases. But the fact is that there's still CO2 coming out. But I can't answer for Nestle, to clarify. But thermal power and pressure, steam above 500 degrees Celsius, that requires combustion. And you can't do that with solar, wind, and battery at a small scale. There's a phenomenal company called Heliogen. It's concentrated solar into 24-hour steam, but it requires a lot of hectares. And it's great for an industrial scale, but for small scale, there's challenges with small boilers.
Is the thought behind your question a concern that some industries are using carbon capture as a way just to keep going?
I think it's just reading quite a lot about the possibility of carbon capture, but encouraging business as usual, and that's what I see with a lot of my clients. It's how can I just offset versus inset? So it was a little bit facetious of me to ask, but to know that you are only engaging with those that are seeking other alternatives. I think we have to have hybrid solutions and transitions. We can't go from A to B and be perfect.
Right. Yeah. No. Thanks for that.
And just a bit more to that answer. Is basically business as usual. Who we're really disrupting is actually the chemical companies that actually burn hydrocarbons to create these products in the first place. So for Nestle, their business as usual, reducing the scope 1 by consuming the animal feed. They're actually reducing their scope 3 in their chocolates and baby formula. But it's really fundamentally disrupting the 19th century incumbents that have had very, very limited ambitions in disrupting their processes.
They haven't needed to. Great question there.
Sorry, last question then for you. You guys are all brilliant, whether scientists, business leaders, innovators. What would be your message to young people out there to encourage them to think that their lives 2030, 2040, 2050 and beyond can be awesome and exciting, and you want these people, I imagine, in your industries, and you want them to be I hate describing them as consumers because I feel like they're citizens first. Can't they be that? Yeah, a positive message for young people out there would be a wonderful one to finish on.
That's lovely. Who wants to start? Kempton, you got the mic, and then we'll just work along. Unless you want time to think, we'll give it to Nikita.
Here you go, Nikita.
There you go.
I guess citizens, young citizens, can always vote with their wallet when they're buying and purchasing. And so if they're purchasing, conscious products, which they clearly can understand is conscious after our conversation, then that's a good thing. And I think that will help influence. Obviously, if a brand like Pangaea is growing, everyone's looking at them going, hey, we should be doing something similar and being more conscious, looking into science, looking into all these other things. So I think, voting with your wallet is a good first step. Yeah.
Great.
What I would say is encouraging is that when I was a child, and even in my 20s, 30s, in my 40s now, these sort of climate conferences were only talking to the people that had already been converted. Whereas what's encouraging now is you have some of the formerly biggest polluters actually engaging in the energy transition in a very earnest, sincere way. And I find that remarkably encouraging. Of course, there are those outliers there that still exist, but seeing the shift coming forward is quite encouraging, and it's heading towards not just awareness for technological solutions or science-based solutions, but even nature-based solutions. Who talked about regen agriculture 10 years ago? It's being taught in primary schools. That's remarkably encouraging. So that's what I'd have to say.
And encouraging two young people to get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, regen ag, phenomenal.
Regenerative agriculture. For those who might not.
So don't just rely on the scientists.
Okay. Nicholas, what would you say to a younger Nicholas? You're young anyway, but let's say a much, much younger Nicholas.
I'd say sort of, trust in the science. I think that it's really going to be there where the change is sort of born, and then it's I think it is really down to then everybody to kind of really get behind and as Nikita sort of said, you have to sort of demand, because ultimately kind of companies will supply the demand, and if they and I've sort of seen heard kind of more recently that maybe some of the younger generation are almost a little bit vexed by some of the by some of the wording, and they don't necessarily trust it anymore. And I think that's down to I think sort of governments and science and everything needs to start heading in the right direction. But I do sort of believe that the future, there is a really bright future for it.
Because presumably the sort of people you're looking to recruit are all going to be passionate about this. They're not going to be content with business as usual.
No, and this is why even here at Extreme, I think what we need to do is sort of suddenly take, is to make sustainability as a subject actually truly engaging, and that is and something that we can all participate in. And when we can do that, then we feel like us as individuals can actually really make a change, rather than it being this kind of lost cause and only these like multinationals have any say in the matter.
That's really nice. Amanda, what would you say in answer to this question?
It's a little bit in line with what you were saying, but I was going to just sort of go after this idea that when you're creating a career for yourself, you need to use what you're good at and passionate about. So whether it be writing or finance, or I mean, I want to encourage science and all of STEM, of course, but not everybody needs to be in that realm. And we need to have people sort of sort out careers where they can actually try to work for a brand that's doing something good. If they're, try to go, if you're interested in finance and good at economics, we need way more people like that. Go work for an investment fund that's working on impact. So try to kind of seek out earlier on, and there's more and more brands and companies doing that, so there are more opportunities. But I think it's about not having to choose. You hear a lot about people graduating from college and I just had to get this job in finance to get the money, and then I'll do something later. So try to kind of maneuver a little bit earlier. It's hard, but it's really worthwhile. And then, of course, also, I do want to just say, yes, science can be understandable. There's new, cool ways to teach it. Get more girls involved in STEM. I'm the only woman up here, so I got to, make this shout about it. Yeah, so I think that, for organic chemistry only lasts 4 months, and then you have the rest of your life after that for the benefit. So.
Well, thank you. It's been an incredibly enjoyable, exhilarating, inspirational time with you all. And I'm, as someone of a much older generation, really, really pleased that you're all coming along with your innovations. When I think about, when I first heard about this session and the idea of what nature can teach us, I remember David Attenborough said, we're not apart from nature. We are a part of nature. And that, for me, was a very profound insight. Along with another one, an ocean scientist told me, if you're ever feeling disconnected from the planet and a little bit ungrounded, just think that if you sense that your eyes are watering and a tear just comes down onto your cheek, just touch it with your fingertip and taste it. What's that taste? It's salty. That we come from the ocean. We're part of the planet, and I find that a very powerful thought, that we're not just here to destroy it and exploit it, that we actually come from the ocean. Would you all join me in giving a warm round of applause to this fantastic panel? Of course, we all get free clothes afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
New product.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Indeed. It's been a great pleasure. Of course.
Thank you so much, everybody. I'll take the mic.
Thank you.
That was brilliant.
Lovely.
Really.
Thank you.
And you've got the most amazing moon appearing over here.